Hello and welcome back. This month I'm talking about adaptations of books, specifically movie and TV series adaptations of books. In this video, I want to talk about Jurassic Park. So only the first two Jurassic Park movies are based on books, and the second one is so different from the second book that it might as well not be based on it at all. Only the character names and small bits of the premise are even at all similar. However, the sequel movies do originate from the same basic premise as the two books, and often refer back to things from those books, like, for instance, Site B as one of the settings of some of the movies, the InGen and Biosyn corporations as major players in this whole genetic manipulation thing, and the basic question of, because science can do something, does that mean that it should? And then also, these animals are here now, what on earth do we do? So I can't really compare the books to the movies as far as plot or characterization or whatnot, because a lot of the plot and characters don't come from the books at all. But I can compare them in terms of the overall themes and ideas that are explored and the conclusions that they come to about those themes. The first movie is based on the first book, and it's definitely the only one that comes close at all to replicating the plot of the book. However, there are some major differences, particularly in terms of how Hammond is characterized, and the implications of that for the theme of the story. In the book, Hammond is not a nice person at all. In fact, he's pretty terrible. He's very clearly not concerned about ethics or safety or anything else that someone who's taking on this kind of venture should be concerned with. He is only concerned with making a profit. In the movie, he comes across as like this kind old grandfather who wanted to do something to make children smile, and it all just went terribly wrong. That's not who he is in the book at all. One of the questions that the book asks is, what should science be used for? Should it be used for things that will help people, like curing diseases and whatnot? Or should it be used primarily to make a profit? And he comes down on the side of make a profit, whereas the narrative clearly comes down on the side of science should be used for things that will help people. So changing his characterization, taking away that aspect of his character in the movies, takes away that core conflict of is this the right use for science? It was obviously a misguided idea that went terribly wrong in the movie. However, it's not made clear just how misguided it was in the way that it is in the book. Yeah, I know, there's that line about when the Pirates of the Caribbean ride breaks down at Disney World, the pirates don't eat the tourists or whatever. And in both the book and the movie, clearly the intention wasn't for anybody to be eaten by a dinosaur. However, the whole idea of a dinosaur theme park is portrayed much more critically in the book than in any of the movies. In some of the movies, especially later on, the idea is kind of glorified. It's made to seem like this really brilliant idea that only went wrong because something unexpected and terrible happened. Additionally, the first book is concerned with whether it was a good idea to create the dinosaurs in the first place. In the movie, there are some of the same scenes that hint at maybe it wasn't. Clearly, the characters don't love that they're being chased around by them, and there is the scene with the sick Triceratops, which was a Stegosaurus in the book, but that doesn't really matter. In any case, there is that scene where it's clear that there's something wrong with this animal that has nothing to do with the potential of somebody getting hurt. In the book, it's made very, very clear that that's because these animals don't belong in the present-day world, they're not adapted to a modern environment, and they're not going to survive and flourish in our modern world. That's never made clear in the movies. That's pretty much just swept to the side in favor of the more exciting action-adventure type stuff. All in all, the first book uses the premise of a dinosaur theme park to explore questions about scientific ethics, among other things, whereas the movie is a little bit less concerned with those ethical questions and more interested in just the excitement and adventure of it. The second movie, The Lost World, is theoretically based on the book with the same title, but it bears very little resemblance to it. In the book, a small group of scientists and two stowaway children go to Site B, which is a place where the dinosaurs were originally created and where they're now running free, because in the books, the first island got blown up. It no longer exists. In the movies, nothing happened to it, they just escaped from it, but in the books, it's no longer in existence, so there's the second island. And these scientists go there to rescue another scientist who had planned an expedition there but had gone ahead of schedule, and another group has gone there from a corporation called Biosyn, which was the group that was trying to steal dinosaur embryos in the first one. Well, now they're trying to steal dinosaur eggs because they want to replicate the whole dinosaur cloning thing. Their actions end up causing some problems for the protagonists, and ultimately they barely get off the island alive, with some characters not surviving. However, most of what's in the movie is not in the book. Sarah Harding is a completely different character in the movie than in the book, and the group of hunters that are there, like, to capture dinosaurs and take them to the mainland, that's not really a thing in the book. There's the group that's stealing eggs, but that's all. And the whole thing with the T-Rex running around a city, that's not in the book at all. So basically an entirely different plot. We really can't compare the plot in terms of faithfulness to the book because there isn't any. It's not faithful to the book. So let's talk about the themes. In the movie, one of the big themes and one of the big questions that the movie revolves around is, what should we do with these dinosaurs now that they're here? Exploit them, protect them, leave them alone, study them. There are all kinds of options presented. And ultimately, the movie comes down on the side of leave them alone. That's not a theme that's really heavily explored in the book. It's hinted at somewhat, in that the characters from Biosyn, and particularly the character Louis Dodgson, he sees the dinosaurs as basically ready to be exploited. When he's explaining his motives to another character, here's what he says. Even university philosophers are beginning to argue that it's unethical for monkeys and dogs and even rats to be subjected to the indignities of laboratory research. We've even had some protests about our exploitation of squid, even though they're on dinner tables all over the world. I'm telling you, Jeff, there's no end to this trend. Eventually, somebody's going to say we can't even exploit bacteria to make genetic products. Oh, come on. Just wait, it'll happen, and it'll shut us down, unless we have a genuinely created animal. Consider, an animal that is extinct and is brought back to life is for all practical purposes not an animal at all. It can't have any rights. It's already extinct. So if it exists, it can only be something we have made. We make it, we patent it, we own it. And we believe that the enzyme and hormone systems of dinosaurs are identical to mammalian systems. In the future, drugs can be tested on small dinosaurs as successfully as they are now tested on dogs and rats, with much less risk of legal challenge. So in a much different context than the movie, there is that same kind of theme woven in. However, it's really just the villain's motivation. It's not something the main characters ever really discuss, or that the book seems to be really trying to make a point about. In fact, I feel like the main point of the book, very much like the first book, was that it was a problem to create these things in the first place. It's not so much, let's protect these creatures and leave them alone. It's, my goodness, what have we done? And ultimately, the book does not present the second island as, like, dinosaur paradise either. Much like in the first book, these dinosaurs are not flourishing, their ecosystem is all out of whack, there's disease spreading among them, so it's implied that dinosaurs will not be in the modern world long term. The third movie, Jurassic Park 3, is the first one that wasn't based on a book, so there's really nothing in terms of plot to talk about. They do draw some aspects of the first two books that didn't make it into the movies in, like for instance there's a thing that involves stealing eggs, which kind of links back to the second book, and the incident with the flying reptiles like the pteranodons and whatnot, that goes back to the first book with a scene that was cut from the movie. So there's a little bit of like drawing inspiration, but for the most part it's an entirely new story. And it's a new story that doesn't really have a strong thematic link with the first two movies or with the two books. It doesn't ask at all, like, about the scientific side of this, like, why were these things created? Was it a good idea to create them? What should we do with them now that they're here? It's entirely just this story about finding this couple's son that got stranded on the island. There is something interesting going on with the velociraptors. In the first book, the raptors that were raised in captivity were totally, like, they had no self-control, they had no social skills or sense of, like, they were not a team, they were just vicious monsters. But then towards the end of the book, the main characters encounter a group of raptors that grew up in the wild and have like this community with a social structure and whatnot, and seem to be more intelligent and more well-adjusted. And in the second book, that's kind of forgotten, with the velociraptors that grew up in the wild on Site B, that second island, being very much like the ones in the first movie. However, the third movie goes more the route of velociraptors being intelligent and social, and has them with like this, I mean, they're incredibly dangerous and incredibly creepy, But they have like a goal throughout the story, which is to get their eggs back, the eggs that were stolen. And once they do get their eggs back, they leave the humans in peace, which is much more representative of how they're portrayed at the end of the first book. As far as like connecting the important themes from the third movie to the books though, I mean, I really have nothing. I'm not really sure what it's trying to say other than let's have another adventure on this island. It delves a little bit into the question of, in a world where dinosaurs have been recreated, would there be any room left for paleontology in the traditional sense, which I think is an interesting question. So it does have something to explore there. But that's not really something that has a counterpart in the novels to where we could look at, like, how is it portrayed here versus there or anything like that. It's just a completely new idea. Jurassic World is, in many ways, returning to the beginning with a new story that very closely emulates the first one. And what I mean by that is that, like the first movie, the fourth one is about a dinosaur theme park gone wrong. Except it's kind of a what-if question. It's like, what if the park had opened and there had been guests there when everything went wrong? In terms of the movie's themes that it explores, it cycles back to the beginning very much on that as well, and I think goes pretty close to what the first movie and the first book were doing with those questions about, like, playing God and just because we could doesn't mean that we should. Except it's not talking about dinosaurs at this point. It's talking about these new hybrid creatures that aren't real dinosaurs, that are basically just theme park monsters. In the original Jurassic Park novel, they were going for accuracy, and that's why they didn't make the dinosaurs less dangerous. They didn't make them slower or less intelligent or less menacing or anything because they wanted it to be accurate. And actually, the idea of how dinosaurs are commonly perceived versus how they actually are, historical accuracy, at least as much as can exist within the idea of, like, genetically engineering an extinct species back into existence, that's an important theme in the first book. And so the idea that, like, these are artificial theme park monsters with more teeth, I feel like that veers too far away from that premise, but it also is an interesting next step. Like, okay, we made these things big and intelligent and dangerous, and it's not impressing people anymore, so would we artificially make them more dangerous? I think a better way to explore that question of what people expect versus accuracy would be to have, like, a conflict over new developments in dinosaur research. Like, okay, so the original Jurassic Park had scaly dinosaurs that looked like reptiles, but now we know that dinosaurs are more like birds and that a lot of them had feathers. So why are there no feathered dinosaurs in Jurassic World? Like, I'm not saying that the dinosaurs had to all have feathers, but it would have been interesting to see a conversation about that. Like, shouldn't we be going for accuracy? Shouldn't we be portraying them more like we now believe that they were, as opposed to in the ways that they've traditionally been perceived, versus, hang on, no, people don't want to see feathers, they want to see more teeth. I think that would have been an interesting thing to introduce in Jurassic World, to bring that theme of accuracy versus audience expectation into the story again. However, as far as the idea of, like, you've created a monster and you've given no thought to the implications of this or the ethics of it, or whether it's actually a good idea to do it, I feel like Jurassic World does a good job of going back to the story's origins on that. In a way, it's kind of a Frankenstein story. It's like, there's this monster, but it's just doing what it was created to do, and the people who created it really should have known better. Fallen Kingdom is essentially a remake of The Lost World, and by that I mean The Lost World, the movie, not the book. It doesn't really... Fallen Kingdom has even less to do with The Lost World, the book, than The Lost World, the movie does. Fallen Kingdom does raise the stakes somewhat in that there is a volcano that's going to erupt, and so getting the dinosaurs off of the island will save them. Leaving them there will most likely make them extinct again. And then it follows up on the theme from Jurassic World of using dinosaurs as military weapons, with a guy who would really like to do that and is using the volcano thing as his way of doing that. He's going to take them off the island and then sell them at an auction to representatives from various militaries around the world. At this point, it's really far removed from either of the books, doesn't really have much of anything to do with them. There is that, like, exploit these creatures versus leave them in peace kind of thing, with the main characters thinking that they're helping to remove dinosaurs from the island to take them to a sanctuary where they'll be able to live, free from human intervention, but really being tricked into working for these people that want to hold this dinosaur military weapon auction thing. Even that, though, is mostly taken from the second movie as opposed to the second book. I suppose you could say that it still is looking at that idea from the first book of, like, just because we can, does that mean that we should? In that they're still creating new hybrid dinosaurs, including the Indoraptor, which is a mix of the Indominus Rex and the Velociraptor. Now, I'm not entirely sure how that works because the Indominus Rex was already part Velociraptor, so it's just less T-Rex, right? It's like maybe 3/4 Velociraptor now and 1/4 T-Rex? I don't know. Anyway, I don't really care about that though. My point is that it's still looking at that question of, like, where do we draw the line? It's still asking what should science be used for, although in a very different context. So there's still some link to what the original was talking about and trying to say, but it's a very loose, tenuous connection there. And then finally, Jurassic World Dominion, the 6th one. Now, at this point, we're in a completely different world from either of the books because the 5th movie, Fallen Kingdom, ended with dinosaurs being released on the mainland. But I will say, it actually fits pretty well with the ending of the first book in that it ends with the implication that some dinosaurs probably made it to the mainland. In fact, we know that some did, but, like, the Procompsognathus is the one that we know made it to the mainland. The implication at the end is that some of the larger and more dangerous ones may have also. The Biosyn Corporation, which is the one that was trying to steal dinosaur embryos in the first book and movie, and trying to steal dinosaur eggs in the second book, well, Louis Dodgson, who's the main Biosyn character that's the antagonist of book 2, he didn't appear in movie number 2, but he appears here, in a completely different storyline. And as much as movie number 6 is, like, all over the place, and I don't even know what to make of it as, like, a story, it is concerned with questions about scientific ethics and how far science should go and what it should be used for, and so I feel like in that way it's a little bit more connected to the two books, although not really. I mean, like, the whole thing about the insects, the genetically engineered insects that are eating all the crops except the ones that come from Biosyn. That's definitely an example of science being used for unethical and selfish purposes, but it doesn't really have any links to anything from the novels. It's just a new idea. And the human cloning thing also is not at all connected to anything from the novels. The novels are about cloning of extinct animals, not cloning of humans. So, I mean, it certainly wouldn't be impossible in the setting of the novel with the technology that they have, but it's not something that the novels ever explore. Ultimately, I got the feeling with Jurassic World Dominion that the dinosaurs were basically there because people expect dinosaurs in a Jurassic Park movie, and for, you know, the running away and screaming scenes, but they weren't really essential to the core of the story. I mean, yes, there was the conflict over, like, we've got dinosaurs loose in the modern world, what should we do about it? And they're often used as examples of, like, okay, so these are animals being mistreated or exploited, or, you know, these are animals we need to protect, or whatever. But ultimately, it could be some kind of random endangered species filling that role in the story. It's not that concerned with dinosaurs as, like, extinct animals brought back to life anymore. Because at this point, they're just everywhere. They're just a part of life, and people have come to accept that. I think that overall, all of the movies are a little bit more enamored with the idea of dinosaurs in the present day than the books are. The books view it very critically. They're like, this is basically Frankenstein's monster level wrong. Like, it should never have been done. It was unethical to do it in the first place, and yes, we have to deal with the fact that it was done, but the movies kind of, I think, I mean, they do occasionally pay lip service to, like, we shouldn't play God, or, like, the one character from the 5th movie, he says to Claire at the beginning that it was a miracle, but then later he says to someone else that it was an abomination. So, like, it's really kind of mixed messages on whether it was a good thing or a bad thing in the movies to clone these dinosaurs. The books come down very hard on the side of it was a bad thing. And I can't imagine any hypothetical sequel to the books having the ending of Jurassic World Dominion and that being portrayed as a good thing. I mean, it's a little bit like the ending of the first one, just in that the original island is destroyed and the dinosaurs are now, at least some of them, loose on the mainland. But neither of the books reach the conclusion that dinosaurs could easily live in harmony with modern-day animals and humans. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on the 6 Jurassic Park movies and how they compare to the 2 Jurassic Park books. If you liked it and you want to see more from me, be sure to subscribe. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday, and this month I'm talking about various adaptations of books and my thoughts on how they were done.